Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our NABERS Energy Modelling Workshop series. I'm just going to give a couple more minutes just to allow people to filter into the room, the webinar room. Great to have you guys on board for this afternoon's session. Um, and just some housekeeping, we are recording this session so you can consume this at a later date as well. And we'll be posting recordings as well on our YouTube channel. So that's just some information for you. Looks like we've got a good amount of attendance today, so great to have everyone on board this afternoon. My name is Ryan Black. I am the sector lead for new builds and planning here at NABERS. And let's kick off the webinar. Looks like we've got a good turnout. So great to have everyone on board. So to welcome you to the webinar series. As I said, my name is Ryan Flack, and I'll be joined for this webinar series by a couple of professionals who have been in our industry for a very long time. So we have PC Thomas and GS Rao from Team Catalyst here joining today for the session. I will mostly be leading the first webinar of this series, and then I'll be handing over to GS and PC, who will be doing the technical workshops in our next two sessions. So we have later on in May and again in August. So thank you and welcome to you both, GS and PC. So in saying that, let me just kick off with some general housekeeping measures first. And firstly, I'd just like to start off with an acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to take some time today to acknowledge that we meet today on many Aboriginal lands across Australia. I'm on Gadigal land of the Eora Nation this morning and this afternoon, and we acknowledge the traditional custodians of these lands, and we show our respects for elders past and present, and we also acknowledge any Aboriginal people joining us today. And just some general housekeeping for us today. So I've muted all the participants to avoid any background noise. And if you have any questions for today's webinar, please use the Q&A section of the webinar to post your questions, and we'll be doing a Q&A at the end of this session. And please don't use the chat function. I know that it may or may not be here in the webinar session, but please use the Q&A button. And we are recording this session as well, so and you will have access to the recording at the end of this webinar series. So a quick overview of what we'll be covering today in the webinar. So NABERS has a couple of products that we'll be running you through. So I'll be running you through the processes for NABERS commitment agreements and agreements to rate and what the differences are between those two products. I'll also be covering a very high level intro to J1V1 in the NCC, both covering NCC 2022 and coming to you with a brief overview of what NABERS will be proposing for NCC 2025. We'll be covering the requirements to comply with the New South Wales Sustainable Buildings SEPP. And to close out, we'll be going over some incentives that are currently available for commitment agreements and some active public consultation session that we have at the moment, followed up by the Q&A at the end. So without further ado, for those who don't have an understanding of NABERS, so NABERS stands for the National Australian Built Environment Rating System. It's not quite the TV show NABERS, but we've been around since 1998. We are a 6-star sustainability rating scheme for commercial buildings. And this rating scheme helps buildings accurately measure, understand, and communicate their environmental performance of their buildings. And so you can see we have a 6-star rating scheme all the way from 1 star, which signifies making a start, all the way up to market leading, which is 6 stars. So NABERS is a government tool which covers existing buildings, which is our performance rating tool set, as well as our design and performance tools, which is our commitment agreements and agreement to rate products, which I'll be covering today. So what is NABERS? So NABERS is a robust rating tool. Our performance rating tool in particular is only accounts for real performance. So this is for existing buildings where ratings are based on actual performance data, which is 12 months of energy bills and water bills for energy and NABERS energy and water ratings. Um, it's benchmarked as well, so you're comparing apples with apples, so buildings can compare their actual performance with comparable buildings within the same sector. And it also provides a benchmark for their progress. So as you can see with this 0 to 6 star or 1 to 6 star rating scale. And it's also, because it's government owned, it's a lower cost than other certification schemes across the world and in Australia itself. So NABERS covers a lot of sectors, as you can see here. So all of the ones apart from schools and retail in the bubble, these are the sectors that we cater to. We've been around since 1998, primarily built from the office sector, but in most recent years, especially since 2010, we expanded to shopping centres, and then from there, it's kind of blown up into all the other sectors that you can see across your screen as well. And very imminently, we'll be expanding to both schools and retail stores. So hope to see you there when we announce for those shortly. And NABERS covers a range of performance rating types. So as you can see here, we cover both energy, water, waste, and indoor environment. And we also offer carbon neutral certification as well for the performance ratings. So why has NABERS been so successful? So as you can see by this graph, NABERS has been very successful in the office market, and it has led to a significant amount of uh, decrease in energy intensity and carbon emissions reduction over a period of 10 years. So for office buildings that get recurring NABERS ratings, they are going to get, we usually encounter up to 42% reduction in CO2 emissions over a 10-year successive rating period cycle. And if you've seen some of our other presentations, shopping centres also have a very similar rate of the decline uh, over a shorter time span. So in the next section, I'm going to cover commitment agreements. So what is commitment agreement? So commitment agreements is essentially a contractual commitment to deliver a building that performs as promised. It only applies to NABERS Energy, and its primary audience is for new buildings, refurbishments, fit outs, and additions. It's a very successful tool for translating what you set out in design in the real world to real world outcomes, and that's because it links the design phase in the planning and the design phase of the building to the actual performance of the building when you go through to get the NABERS rating after 12 months of building operation, but I'll cover that shortly. And this is because it has multiple stages of independent verification. So we have an estimation or NABERS modeling process, followed by an independent design review process, and where you can engage an independent design review panelist to conduct that review. So NABERS, why has commitment agreements been so successful? So 91% of commitment agreements hit their target within 2 ratings, performance ratings, and over 36% have overachieved their target by more than 0.5 stars or more. And we've recently did a study with the Green Building Council of Australia, where we assessed their Green Star buildings subset of projects, and 98% of those buildings hit their target within the first rating. So now I'll cover the actual process of a commitment agreement and what would normally be followed with going through the process. So in this, as you can see here, this graphic here is that you have the planning stages along the top, and the NABERS stages in the middle of what you'll be doing, and the nitty-gritty of what you'll be doing at each stage along the bottom. So during the planning and building uh, certificate, construction certificate phases of the process, you would be firstly coming to us and entering into a commitment agreement. So what that would mean is that coming to us with a signed contract, and that's when we go through the countersigning stage, and that's when you pay for the commitment agreement fee with us. From there, you go and model or engage a NABERS modeler to perform NABERS modeling on your commitment agreement. From there, you use the handbook to perform this, and what from there gets generated is what's called an estimation report, or in the industry, sometimes it's called a NABERS modeling report. From there, after this phase, what usually happens is that it goes into the independent design review phase, and in that phase is where you engage an independent design review panelist to perform the independent design review on the actual project. And then following that, NABERS will issue a certificate which basically allows you to market your NABERS target to a broader audience, and that includes logos and a certificate, and greater marketing rights. And prior to this stage, prior to the independent design review stage, there's only very limited marketing rights that is allocated to commitment agreements at this stage. And then following that, usually during the building and construction phase, NABERS will reach out to project teams and will typically ask for a couple of things. So this includes construction certificate dates, occupancy certificate dates, and asking for when the NABERS data collection will start for the NABERS performance rating. And so we'll normally reach out to project teams in relation to this, but this is just so you're aware. And following this, just gives us an idea of when the NABERS performance rating will be lodged with us. And following 12 months of building performance and subject to the building meeting with the data collection criteria under each respective rules in the NABERS rulings, that's when you can start the data collection period and go into performing the NABERS rating for the building. So as you can see, the reason why commitment agreements are really successful is because the process for NABERS continues after the planning system stops, which is kind of differs to how the other verification methods in Section J of the NCC work. So J1V3 and J1V2, which is Green Star. buildings. And so essentially the NABERS rating is used to confirm the target that you set in the initial outset of the commitment agreement. So now I'm going to cover what our newest product, which is called our Agreement to Rate tool is. So an Agreement to Rate is essentially a tool which developers will enter into where they can commit to getting a NABERS performance rating. And so the tool is primarily used for policymakers, and so it's more of a compliance mechanism than an actual design mechanism, as what is outlined with the commitment agreement. And so the agreement to rate is primarily for there, so policy makers can essentially see and verify the actual outcomes of the buildings once it leaves the planning system. So, and I'll cover the differences between the commitment agreement and the agreement to rate in the next slides. So this is the process for an agreement to rate. So an agreement to rate is very similar to a commitment agreement, except during this stage, basically you go through a contract signing phase. And with that, we have a special portal on our website where you can lodge these, lodge the agreements. And that kind of makes this easier for us to process, and it makes this a bit more streamlined for us to process for you. And with that, basically, you just go in and pay the fee, you sign the contract, and basically, as you can see here, it's a much more lighter steps than what the commitment agreement would have. And so basically, you'll set the agreement, and then you go into the construction phase of the building. And then NABERS will basically reach out to you regarding the occupancy certificate dates for the project. And then after that step, that's when we'll ask you a bit more questions about when NABERS will be collecting the data, and then you go ahead and perform your NABERS rating. So it's really just, as the product says, it's basically an agreement to get a NABERS rating in the performance phase. And so you're not necessarily having to do those design verification steps. And so the differences between these two products. So as I've covered before, so the commitment agreement has more of an inbuilt framework for quality assurance. And I'd like to really stress here is that commitment agreements allow for full marketing rights for all performance of your building throughout the full process. That includes the design, future performance, construction, all the way through to getting the performance rating once it goes through. And in terms of that, we have a handbook to allow for modeling, which I'm sure that some of you are very aware of. It only applies to energy, and it's a bit more expensive to register. And that's because it has all of those steps and you're paying for the marketing rights to use our marketing material to market your buildings. Agreement to rates are a little bit different. So they, as I said, doesn't really have those checks and verification steps between the signing phase to the performance rating phase. It doesn't allow for you to market your performance. So if you want to market your NABERS rating, your NABERS energy rating, you need to sign up for a commitment agreement. If you sign up to an agreement to rate, we won't allow you to market anything in relation to your building at all. So, and this doesn't have a external framework Q&A process. So agreement to rates are available in another set of policies, which I'll cover later on in the presentation. So that's why it requires policy frameworks to help introduce requirements to align with those particular items. So agreement to rate is a bit more flexible, so it allows you can use it to enter into agreement for all all of our rating suite. So energy, water, indoor environment, waste, and when we launch embodied carbon rating tool shortly with this year, that'll be immediately available for embodied carbon. We all are also working on a commitment agreement for embodied carbon as well, but that will come a bit later on after the initial release of the operational tool. And in terms of price, there's a much different price difference as well. So, and the reason why it's that cheap in comparison to the commitment agreement is because you're not paying for the 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 QA steps and also the marketing rights essentially to market your building. So next, I'm going to cover um, very briefly J1V1 in the National Construction Code. And we'll be going little bit more into this a bit more in the next successive sessions. So I'm happy to take some questions now, but if we're getting very much into the technical nitty-gritty, I'm going to kick that onto the next sessions. But I'll go over for a very briefly high level NCC 2022, and I'll be covering what we'll be going through for NCC 2025. So as you can see here, J1V1 covers a range of different sectors. So there's offices, hotels, shopping centers, and common areas of apartment buildings. And essentially, to comply with J1V1, you need to enter into a commitment agreement for those star ratings as outlined there for each of those sectors. And in saying that, the NCC does differ between only covers regulated energy, whereas NABERS covers regulated and non-regulated energy. And so for offices in particular, there are particular exclusions that you have to make to certain systems. But I'll cover that. That'll be covered in the next sessions. But essentially, it's a bit more straightforward. So it's primarily there so you can use one model to comply with both uh, Section J and NABERS modeling as well. And so if you are wanting to do that, that is a viable option. And we'll explore more technically how we cover that in the next sessions. And for NCC 2025, so I'm not sure if you are aware, but the ABCB have just on the 1st of May released the public consultation draft of NCC 2025. So I encourage you to head to their website to find out more information about how you can make and submit a response to NCC 2025. I know that ABCB are doing a series of roadshows over the next 2 months, so May and June, in all the major capital cities around Australia on NCC 2025. And in particular, NCC 2025 has a energy efficiency response section. So that particularly addresses Section J. So if you have particular areas that get identified in NCC 2025 that you would like to put feedback on, I definitely encourage you to submit feedback by following their instructions. And I'm happy to share the links to that, to the pages at the end of this session as well. But as you can see here, I've just got some very brief dot points, but at the moment, NABERS is preparing some further changes to J1V1 beyond what is already outlined in the public comment draft. We are planning at this stage to release our consultation response in June next month. Uh, so you can see what we will be proposing for NCC 2025. But just to give you a heads up of what we will be proposing, so we'll be updating targets for each building sector across each of those existing sectors that I outlined earlier. And we'll also be introducing decimal NABERS star ratings. So for example, like a 4.7 stars and the like. And so those changes will be rolled out across all of our tools. And so that kind of clears up some of the expectations of what you'll be seeing in terms of what you need to provide in terms of simulation modeling to a certain star level, a certain decimal star level, rather than the way that it's currently communicated in J1V1 at the moment in terms of the percentage of greenhouse gas emissions, which is a bit confusing for some people, which we've received stakeholder feedback for. So we'll be releasing that feedback for you to view in the next month. So, and if you have any questions on that, please just let me know. But yeah, you won't be able to see that until next month. Next, I'll cover the New South Wales Sustainable Buildings SEPP. So this is a piece of policy that came out recently in New South Wales. It was live since the 1st of October 2023, so it's been out for quite some time. But I thought I'd just cover the requirements of this and what you need to do to comply with for NABERS in particular. So this primarily impacts a range of sectors across New South Wales for office buildings, service apartments, and hotels and motels over a particular threshold. And this is what is currently classified as large commercial development. And we anticipate that more large commercial development types will be added in the next successive updates to the policy in the years to come. But keeping in mind, these are the buildings that we're speaking to when we cover off the next set of provisions. So in saying that, the Sustainable Buildings SEPP has a series of provisions that apply to non-residential development. So I'm going to cover the large commercial development subset, but in saying that, there's a series of general energy provisions. There's a net zero statement. There's embodied emissions reporting, and I'll cover that briefly as well. And what we're primarily here for is the energy performance and the water performance verifications steps. So in saying that, for embodied emissions reporting, at the moment, while NABERS is still developing the embodied emissions tool, which we'll be releasing shortly. There is a materials form that needs to be filled out, and it's basically a quantities form, and you just need to lodge that as a part of your development application. And if you have any particular questions on that, please reach out to us if you have any questions on that, and we can help you out with particular inputs and requirements with that. And I'm going to cover off the energy performance and verification and water performance verification steps in the next slide. But essentially, if the buildings don't meet the targets that I outlined will outline in the next slides, essentially there's offsets that you need to purchase for a certain amount of time for electricity, which is LGCs or ACCUs if it's gas, depending on the fuel mixture of your building. and that's if it doesn't hit the energy performance target. But as you can see here, there's a series of targets here for each building. So for hotels and motels and service apartments, it's currently sitting at 4 stars for energy. And for office buildings, it's sitting at 5.5 stars for energy. And for water verification, it is sitting at 3 stars across all sectors. And so to comply with these targets, essentially there's a series of steps that basically what you'll need to do at each phase. So firstly, there is in the development application phase, that's when you can enter into a NABERS agreement. And so what I mean by NABERS agreement is that for energy, you can enter into a agreement to rate or a commitment agreement, but keeping in mind that you need to comply with the particular marketing rights for each of those products. And for water, you need to enter into an agreement to rate. And then during the construction certificate phase, you will go and do your modeling and develop your energy efficiency reporting, and then go through the occupancy certificate stages. And we'll do all of those processes that I've outlined earlier on in the piece. And then following the occupancy of the building, the NABERS rating must be performed within 24 months of achieving occupancy certificate for these buildings. And this requirement overrides the requirements outlined in the NABERS rules. So I know that there are, for offices in particular, there is a requirement where it says it's either going to be 2 years post occupancy certificate or 24 months, 2 years, 24 months, or 75% occupancy rate. But with the New South Wales Sustainable Buildings SEPP, this requirement for 24 months post occupancy certificate overrides the requirements of the NABERS rules. And finally, I'm just going to cover some current incentives that we have available at the moment for commitment agreements. So in saying that we have 2 offers, but we'll mostly cover one offer that we have that is closing very shortly. So in New South Wales, we have what's called our new builds offer. So it's primarily there to have incentivized developments that commit to high energy performance using NABERS commitment agreements. And applications for this offer is open until the 30th of June, which is the end of this financial year. And then beyond that, this will be the end of this offer. And essentially what this offer does is that it will waive the NABERS commitment agreement fee. So you won't be paying the fee that's associated with this, with the commitment agreement. And to basically apply for this offer, all you need to do is basically submit the commitment agreement contract to NABERS, and the target needs to essentially be above the NABERS rating target for each sector that I'll outline in the next slide. So if, and here's the table here. So for new building projects, as you can see, there's a range of different targets. So if you're looking to target, and most offices, it'll be at 6 stars, but most of those other targets align mostly with the NCC for shopping centres, hotels, and apartment buildings. And if you are performing any kind of major upgrades or major refurbishments on buildings as well, we do have, and we are keen to have some refurbishment projects come through. So yeah, if you're looking to waive and enter into a commitment agreement for those particular subsets of major upgrades, the qualifying criteria is in those bottom 2 categories down below. And then finally, we're just doing some stakeholder consultation at the moment. So uh, NABERS is currently doing some stakeholder consultation to uh, update certain formatting of our handbook. We're doing it just so we want the format to be very user-friendly and structured in a way that users like yourself, model modelers, RDR reviewers and the like, sustainability consultants and the like, will get best use of using it. In saying that, um, the stakeholder consultation closes today at 5 p.m. If you haven't submitted a response but would like to submit a response, please get in touch with myself or send an email to the NABERS inbox. And the NABERS email address is there on your screen. And you can submit your feedback by 5 p.m. We are also planning on doing a series of stakeholder workshops in the next financial year. Most likely will be either August or September, and that's mostly looking at uh, more in-depth issues beyond the structure of the handbook. So that relates to technical areas of the handbook. It relates to very process-related stuff, and so we'd like to get your feedback as well. So if you're interested in attending these workshops, please don't hesitate to reach out to me via email. And I've got my email at the end of this slide. So um, we'll add you to our list of invitations so we can invite you to those sessions later on in the year. And I'll also be coming out to let you guys know that uh, when we'll be launching our consultation piece for NCC 2025 too. And I think that pretty much wraps us up for the presentation. So we can go into any sort of questions and answers that we have at the moment. I see we've got some questions here already. So as you can see here, we've got some questions. So I might just unshare my screen and I'll just have myself on the screen now so I can answer some questions. So an anonymous attendee has asked, for the purposes of the development is capable of achieving if there is a NABERS commitment agreement in place to achieve the standard. So to answer that question, so the I understand that the section 3.3 of the SEPP states that uh, the policy if you look into the legislation of the policy, it accounts for both agreement to rate and commitment agreement. So, but in the actual legislation, it does say commitment agreement only, and that's just due to a wording a wording requirement at the time when it was initially put in. And so to comply with the SEPP, you can use both a commitment agreement or agreement to rate to comply with the SEPP. Zach has asked, when you say 6-star for most office buildings, what office buildings do not need 6 stars? So, uh, Zach, I believe if that question is in relation to the offer itself, so to be eligible for the offer, you need to be uh, your building needs to target a commitment agreement for 6 stars. But we don't accept any um, for officers any commitment agreement below that to be eligible for the offer. It would just be applicable um, as per normal, and you'd be required to pay for the fee. Um, uh, and Ignacio has also brought up another question as well. So he's asked what appropriate building fabric needs to be used under J1V1. I might have PC and GS come on and share their thoughts on what that means for them in terms of fabric. So I'll just get them to turn on their video and so they can join us for this question in particular. But we'll come back to that question shortly. Matt Williams has asked, is the agreement to rate primarily for SEPP compliance for projects that don't want to or can't enter a full commitment agreement? Yes, Matt, that is correct. So the agreement to rate is primarily there as a more cost uh, beneficial solution for developers and building owners that don't want to go through the full uh, verification process. We understand that not all projects will want to or will um, be financially able to uh, enter into a commitment agreement, and so to comply with the SEPP, that is why they can enter into an agreement to rate. So um, hopefully that answers your question. And so uh, yeah, you should please reach out to us if you have any questions in relation to more questions in relation to the agreement to rate product. It's primarily there so you can quickly and efficiently comply with the New South Wales Sustainable Buildings SEPP. And it's there as well. So if you want to enter into an agreement to rate first and then upgrade to a commitment agreement for energy as well, you can do that too. So it's primarily there so you can comply with the requirements pretty much without having the additional steps that you need to follow with the commitment agreement process. So Aravind has asked why apartment buildings need to only apply with only 4.5 stars. So uh, as so if you 4.5 stars is based off the uh, the NABERS energy targets for 4.5 stars is based off um, the equivalent results for apartment buildings for if an apartment building went through J1V3. And so um, in doing and how we go through these targets is essentially what we do is we uh, will model how these um, buildings will perform. We develop a series of archetypes for how these buildings will perform under the NCC. And from there, that's how we get those targets. Essentially, it's very similar to how uh, the typical NABERS energy modeling process goes to develop the models, and then we'll go and assess the outputs, and that's how we get those targets essentially. But yeah, and it's also based on our rating data as well. So we will also take into consideration the performance ratings of the subset of buildings that currently exist for existing building stock. So that also takes into consideration as well. So Bill has asked, is 1 star rating associated with a certain amount of energy saved or reduction in carbon emissions? If so, how much is it? So Bill, our NABERS rating scale is dependent on carbon emissions. So uh, the result that you get on your NABERS rating will depend on uh, where your building will fall in terms of the actual, each star rating has like a band of emission thresholds that the building needs to fall into. And so um, essentially those emission thresholds are outlined in our rules, I'm fairly sure, with each star rating. And so that's how it works with the NABERS process. But I can follow up with you um, post webinar with a more robust answer than that. So, okay, just going. Another anonymous person has asked, um, what happens if you don't achieve the NABERS rating under the commitment agreement within 2 years? So, in saying that, the NABERS commitment agreement process allows for 2 successive NABERS ratings to meet the target. If the NABERS rating hasn't been met, essentially what that means is that the building will have it assigned as not achieved on our rating register, on our commitment agreement register, and that's basically disclosed publicly, essentially, and that's the particular outcome for and consequences of that. With If the commitment agreement was used for the New South Wales Sustainable Buildings SEPP, if the target isn't met, they need to essentially use a calculator to which is available on our website to show the difference between the target that's set in the SEPP versus the NABERS target that they achieved, and that calculator will determine how many LGCs and how much accus that need to be purchased for the building, and essentially the offsets need to be purchased to comply with the SEPP. Um, Matt Williams has asked, and so the SEPP doesn't overload the few RDR reviewers. So in terms of that, NABERS are open to potentially reviewing the amount of RDR reviewers that are on the panel, and that just depends on the amount of commitment agreements that come through. So we will respond to that on a needs basis at the moment. At this stage, it's primarily there for developers. The agreement to rate product is primarily there for developers that are seeking a lower cost solution that they're going to be going through the planning process. So it's up to yourselves or as the solution provider, or up to developers who are wanting to comply with the Sustainable Building SEPP to choose whatever NABERS solution applies or compliance solution that applies to them. So So, an anonymous person has asked about NABERS ratings for energy. Are they based on carbon emissions or energy usage? So, NABERS ratings are based on carbon emissions, and as I mentioned in the question before, it's based on a series of emissions bands that we have, and they correspond to each of those star ratings that I outlined earlier on in the presentation. And how do you rate a building which sources 100% renewables? So for NABERS Energy, we have what's called our renewable energy indicator, and that is primarily there to sit outside of the NABERS Energy rating results. And I can come back to you if you'd like to contact me separately, and I can come back to you with more information about how that's treated. But essentially, the renewable energy indicator is there to show how much renewable energy is sourced on site. So that could be from whether that's a green power, whether that's PPAs, whether that's off-site, on-site renewables. There's a wide variety of um, how renewable energy is accounted for. Um, and so I can definitely follow up with that with more information if you can provide um, your email address to us and we can go from there. So Noni has asked, um, Noni has asked that this applies for commitment agreements for only for large commercial developments. So Noni, just to clarify, um, I understand that the SEP outlines that it says commitment agreements, but what that actually means is that in the policy is that both either a commitment agreement or an agreement to rate can be used for those particular development types in the policy. And the the commercial buildings will expand in the next successive years for the SEP as well. So, and an additional anonymous person has asked, what do I do if an agreement to rate, if I enter into an agreement to rate and once the building is rated and it doesn't achieve the rating? So similar to commitment agreements, an agreement to rate also has a public register as well. And so with that, the rating results will also be publicly displayed as well. And in saying that, similar to if it doesn't meet the targets, so they will have to go through the process of purchasing LGCs and ACCUs if it's gas, and that just depends on whether it's run by electricity or by gas and what that fuel mixture is in the building as well. And so they will need to basically purchase the gap between what's in the policy and what they actually got in the NABERS performance rating result. And great. Looks like we've got through quite a number of questions. So I'll just allow for a couple more minutes just to get any more questions. One person's asked, for how long does the building need to purchase offsets? So you'll need to um, purchase. I believe that that information is outlined on the Sustainable Buildings SEPP page. Um, so it will be um, dependent on that. I believe I don't want to misquote that, so I recommend um, that you head to their website and find information from there. Um, Patrick has asked, under the SEP, do shortfalls in LGC and ACCU purchases need to be repeated annually? So Patrick, just to answer your question with that, with the purchase, what you'll be doing is there'll be a period of time of that you need to purchase. I think I believe it's 5 years for 5 years for LGCs and 10 years for ACCUs, but yeah, please don't quote me on that. Please go to the website to receive to get further information on that. But essentially, is that you need to purchase them in bulk upfront, and so you don't need to repeat this process on an annual basis. And what will happen with the planning process is that once I think there's a step in the DA phase where you'll complete the step with the LGC purchase as well, but that's in the New South Wales planning portal, which I don't have access to, unfortunately. So Nick has asked, can you talk a little bit more about water performance verification requirements? and noting the CA process is very energy specific. Yes, so Nick, with that, basically to comply with the SEPP, what you need to do is enter into an agreement to rate for um, water, and what that means is, yeah, essentially apply for agreement to rate for water. And I know that the building won't be able to market their water rating, and that's primarily there because we don't have a water commitment agreement available at the moment. Um, but yeah, you basically will enter an agreement to rate for water, and then you perform the water performance rating when the building goes into operation. And essentially, there's no particular penalties associated with water at the moment, um, in comparison to what the energy requirements are. And so it's basically, yeah, you get the agreement to rate, you'll do the NABERS rating, the NABERS water rating it when the building goes into operation, and the the water rating will be recorded on our public register, essentially, and used for compliance purposes to comply with the SEPP. A simple question, where can you find information of the minimum star ratings for different building types? Can't seem to find it on our website. So um, uh, there are a couple of different places. So if you would like to reach out to us, you're welcome to email us, and you can put in a data request for this. But I can see PC is also typing an answer as well to this. But we also have section J1V1 of the National Construction Code, and J1V1 is mostly for NABERS Energy, and that outlines the NABERS star ratings for a lot of those sectors that I've outlined there previously as well. If you're looking to have other sectors that are not covered in J1V1, um, that is, you're welcome to reach out to us and we can come back to you with an answer. Um, and in saying that, yeah, you'll need to um, essentially go through that process to get that. And in saying that, you can also use our reverse calculators that we have on our website as well. NABERS has a series of calculators where you can put in a series of inputs. The reverse calculator is primarily used where you can basically enter in your amount of gas or your amount of electricity, and you can work backwards from there. And what results is essentially the NABERS rating result that you get from those inputs. And we also have our estimate your NABERS rating result, which is basically you will do the opposite. In that case, you'll put in uh, all of those inputs, and then you'll come out with the NABERS rating result at the end. But if you're more looking for more like a policy answer, I definitely would recommend the National Construction Code. There are other policies at the moment as well that are live, both through government procurement policies and Sustainable Buildings SEPP as well. So that should give you a good indication of where what NABERS ratings you should be targeting for each building type. But please reach out to us if you would like more information with that. We're more than happy to provide you answers with that. And I'll just have one. I think that's pretty much it for all the questions. So thank you guys very much for attending today's session. I'm going to wrap up the session here, but thank you very much for attending. And if you, we do have two more sessions coming up as well. So we'd be really excited for you guys to attend. So we have two more sessions, one on the 22nd of May and another one on the 7th of August. And in those two sessions, PC Thomas and GS Rao from Team Catalyst will go further into depth on what is required as a part of NABERS and NABERS Energy Commitment Agreements to comply with J1V1, and we're going into the technical aspects of energy simulation modeling. So And to respond to Matt's question, they're the same session twice? No, they are not. So you're welcome to attend the first session, and we'll be covering different components across both sessions. So we hope to see you there, and we'll come up with that with additional registration links. There's some already live already, but we'll come out to you as well with further registration links if you're interested. And that concludes today's session. So thank you all very much for attending. We'll come up with a webinar recording shortly and appreciate you for joining us today. Thank you.